Shock! Right now, in the Moscow region, massive traffic jams and kilometer-long lines of cars are forming. Residents, terrified by the strikes, are trying to escape in a panic. Or perhaps this is a reaction to the words of the Kremlin's main mouthpiece, Vladimir Solovyov. He had a real meltdown. On live TV, he openly called for all frightened Muscovites to flee, calling them traitors.
Leave if you are weak and have nothing Russian in you. Furthermore,
the propagandist cold-bloodedly threatened to introduce total military censorship and, in Stalinist fashion, exterminate cowards and alarmists right inside the country. Have Muscovites sensed trouble in every sense of the word and are now leaving the capital en masse?
I'm done with this shit. Everything's burning. Literally everything. All of Moscow's burning. All the plants and factories are on fire. I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm done with this shit.
Breaking. Moscow is in total collapse after a Ukrainian drone attack. Hellish consequences. Kyiv has severely torched Putin's military wallet. The largest oil refinery has been knocked out. Muscovites are in a panic and propagandists, in a rage, have started criticizing the air defense, acid rain and the blackest smoke. And also how Russian anti-aircraft gunners defended the sky in style. Multi-million-dollar missiles missing their targets. And instead of sirens, the authorities chose to leave Muscovites in the dark. How the Kremlin's entire military-industrial complex ended up in the crosshairs and why Z-patriots are already predicting the fall of the regime. All the shocking results of the historic attack right now. Greetings, this is the Ukraine Today channel. My name is Andrei Silakov. Let's discuss the news from a brightly burning Moscow. Ukraine has taken an unprecedented step, delivering the most massive and destructive strike on Moscow in all the years of the full-scale war. A swarm of attack drones broke through the air defense, plunging the capital of the aggressor state into chaos and panic.
It's 5 a.m. for me.
Strategic facilities engulfed in flames, including Moscow's largest oil refinery, have become a symbol of the collapse of Putin's promises of a safe rear. Summing up this historic attack, journalist Michael Naka noted that the visual images of the burning Russian capital, which previously only scared people on the internet, have now become an objective reality.
Moscow was hit by the largest drone attack of the entire war, even though not that many drones were flying, only about 200 units, if you believe the Russian authorities according to the morning reports, but they had a colossal effect. Remember all those images made by AI and artists of the burning capital? Well, at least partially they've come to life, except the Kremlin isn't.
The myth of an impenetrable dome over the capital has finally collapsed before the eyes of millions of its residents. Ordinary Muscovites, who for years were told on TV that everything was under control and the special operation was going according to plan, suddenly woke up to explosions and the howl of drones flying over their heads. The most shocking thing was the quality of the Russian anti-aircraft systems, which demonstrated total incompetence in intercepting targets.
It worked terribly. There are many videos where missiles just fly past the drones. It's unclear what kind of experts are operating the Panzers and S-300s. In short, Ukraine can launch many more drones, and everyone understands this, but they're horrified that such a relatively small attack led to such massive consequences. More and more Z-patriots believe that it's no longer possible to ignore what's happening. But the residents themselves are also in shock. They certainly didn't expect this when they're told from the screens that Russia is advancing in all directions and everything is under control. The 5th year of the war has led to a burning Moscow, and it will only get worse for Russia from here.
But nevertheless, some military propagandists reacted quite absurdly to the performance of their air defenses. Apparently, under heavy pressure from censorship, administrators of major pro-war channels began mass publishing praised odes to Moscow's defense, ignoring objective facts. Against the backdrop of pillars of black smoke and burning enterprises, such attempts to curry favor with the authorities look like an outright mockery of their own audience. Michael Nake spoke about this, and the Astra publication quoted the Z-patriots, quoted them.
There are several of them present here, and you can clearly see that more than just a few are gathered together in this place.
Breaches at the Moscow Oil Refinery. Yes, it's unpleasant, frustrating, we need to look into it. But out of 555 drones, only a few reached their targets in the capital, and that still says something. It's not just the Panzer alone, it's also the grassroots design bureaus, which 2 or 3 years ago were startups in garages, and serial electronic warfare, and interceptor drone operators, and the coordinated work of the Ministry of Defense, Rosgvardia, and the aerospace forces in a single loop. This system grew out of the war. It learns every day, and every day it gets better, wrote Komsomolskaya Pravda war correspondent Alexander Kots.
And VGTRK journalist Andrei Medvedev also stated that only a few reached their targets. And political scientist and foreign agent Sergei Markov called Moscow's air defense the strongest in the world. This shows...
But, actually, well, let me think for a moment.
Furthermore, apart from everything that has already been discussed so far, it is also worth noting that there are additional aspects and considerations that should be taken into account when thinking about this topic, as they may have a significant impact on the overall understanding and outcome.
Reputational collapse, the Kremlin has faced an insurmountable mathematical problem in this war. Ukraine's defense forces are masterfully using asymmetric tactics, where the cost of the launch devices is dozens of times lower than the resources Russia is forced to spend on attempts to intercept them. An OSINT analyst emphasizes that this format of strikes exhausts Russian arsenals and causes immeasurable economic damage, making further defense of the capital prohibitively expensive.
It absolutely doesn't matter how many millions of targets your air defense shot down if the object they are protecting is hit. This means that the enemy correctly calculated the force and resources needed to hit. Moreover, today the cost ratio of anti-aircraft missiles to drones is such that the drone attacker wins purely economically, even without hitting anything at all. And yet, they are hitting targets. And if they can guaranteed hit a target of interest in Moscow, then hitting any other target in the country will be possible with much less effort. And let me remind you, today they are achieving their goals using almost nothing but drones. With the appearance of other means of attack, writes fighter bomber, in sufficient quantities, they will achieve these goals even faster and easier.
And separate attention is deserved by the authorities' attitude toward the lives of their citizens during the massive Ukrainian raid. Despite the fact that real air battles were unfolding over a multi-million metropolis and missile debris was falling directly on residential areas, the city leadership and security structures did not take basic safety measures. The authorities preferred to maintain an illusion of calm, exposing residents to mortal danger.
The humanism of the Russian authorities toward their own Russian citizens, it seems to me, should raise big questions. Its existence because everything we see shows that the Russian authorities don't give a damn about the citizens. So during the attack on Moscow, there were no sirens, no warnings, and no, calls to hide in shelters. Here in Lithuania, for example, where I live, yes, in Vilnius, if some weather balloon enters even at the edge of the map, that's it. Alerts go out everywhere, everyone to the shelters, everyone, to underground parking and so on and so forth. There, damn it, 200 drones are flying over Moscow, everything is exploding, and Sobyanin, poofed, no notifications, no alarm signals. If
we look at the situation globally, then according to the journalist, the successful strike on the Moscow refinery in Kapotnya was a clear signal that the defense has been breached. Now, opportunities are opening up for the Ukrainian command to multiply the scale of attacks. Having probed the weak spots and radar blind zones, kamikaze drones will be able to approach targets even more massively. The Russian command will no longer physically have time to rebuild its defense layers.
It must be said that it's truly obvious that Ukraine can ramp up these attacks as much as it wants, and Ukraine just saw the day before yesterday that Russia has problems with air defense because, drones from a very small batch got through. They launched a larger batch. Tomorrow they'll launch, the day after tomorrow, 1,000. I'm speaking figuratively. As for them costing bucks, of course not, but it's, yes, tens of thousands of dollars. While anti-aircraft missiles cost much more, the ones Russia uses to shoot them down, and not very successfully at that. It's not Sobyanin who needs to wake up, but Putin. He's messed up, and basically the mess from his pants is flying all over the country. It's time for everyone to understand this, including...
The danger for the Kremlin also lies in the fact that a colossal share of the military-industrial complex, which produces weapons for the war, is concentrated around the capital. Having lost the ability to protect its airspace, Moscow is putting its rocket and space clusters, solid fuel production plants, defense enterprises, and more under direct threat. The video blogger emphasizes that these facilities are completely open and extremely vulnerable targets.
Here, under the cover of air defense, high-tech production is concentrated. Things that Russia cannot afford to lose. Energy, rocket building, the defense industry. All of this is within a radius of a few dozen kilometers from the Kremlin, the areas where drones fly into Kaputnia, oil depots along the highway, gas processing plants, and the country's largest thermal power plant. In almost the same area, literally among residential blocks, is the main plant for the production of solid rocket fuel for ballistic and anti-aircraft missile systems. The production, apparently, hasn't been moved anywhere. An explosion there is a serious matter. In the south, there's production of anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles. The country's only manufacturer of spacesuits and ejection seats for combat aviation. In the north and northeast, there's a rocket and space cluster. Production of cruise missiles and engines for them, hypersonic weapons, spacecraft, production of nuclear fuel for all Russian nuclear power plants, equipment for thermal and nuclear power, radio electronics and military optics, sighting systems, guidance systems, reconnaissance equipment.
This massive attack is just a prelude to a new, even harsher phase of the confrontation, which finally brings the war deep into the Russian rear. According to the journalist, neither officials nor ordinary citizens will be able to ignore reality anymore. At the end of the video, the blogger warned about what awaits Russians next if Putin is not stopped.
So look, it will get worse. There will be more drones, missiles will be added, cruise missiles, then ballistics will be arriving, there will be more collateral damage, that is, deaths among civilians. This is inevitable with scaling, especially considering the clumsiness of Russian air defense. What to do, you ask? The only possibility is, first, not to allow your relatives and loved ones to go and participate in this war, not to help the state, and to demand from the state that it stop the war. You can write about it in detail, or you can talk about it, discuss it, or even debate it within the framework of current legislation or the practice of law enforcement as it stands today. You can at the very least bring it up for consideration or mention it in passing, if nothing else. And in this regard, when you look at the situation from this perspective, he is...
Absolutely, without a doubt. Yes, absolutely. I am completely certain about that.
Right, more than ever, because with every day of delay by the dictator who refuses to end the aggression, the consequences for the capital of the Russian Federation and for the whole country in general will become increasingly horrific, and the scale of destruction will grow relentlessly. Which, by the way, President Zelensky also stated recently.
We do not want this war, and never have. Everyone knows this, and our partners know it too. We certainly don't want Ukraine to burn because of the enemy. But if Ukraine burns, your Moscow will burn as well. Therefore, we emphasize once again, it is time to stop the aggression. It is time to end this war.
And while Putin's propaganda tries to lull Russians with tales of total control, the war is irrevocably returning to Russia itself. A record-breaking raid by Ukrainian drones not only paralyzed the skies over Moscow and set fire to key facilities, but also clearly demonstrated the complete disconnect between the Kremlin's illusions and the reality on the capital's streets. The dictator chooses to stubbornly ignore the catastrophe, but it is no longer possible to hide the truth from shocked Muscovites. See how Putin is rapidly losing control over his own war in our report.
At night, on June 18th, Moscow was subjected to one of the most massive air attacks since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Attack drones struck the Moscow Oil Refinery, paralyzed civil aviation, and forced security forces to close major city highways. The Security Service of Ukraine called the latest strike on the Moscow refinery a systematic defeat of Russia's strategic facilities. The SBU emphasized that if Russia does not stop its aggression, such strikes will continue.
Repeated strikes on the Moscow Oil Refinery indicate that Ukrainian drones can systematically hit the enemy's most important strategic targets in the very heart of Russia. Each such attack forces the Russian Federation to spend additional resources on repairs, strengthening air defenses, and restructuring logistics. The SBU will continue to conduct special operations that exhaust the aggressor's economic potential and increase the cost of war for Russia. From a message by the Security Service of Ukraine on Telegram.
The attack on Moscow coincided with the summit of leaders from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Kazan. This is the first official meeting in this format since 2022. According to analysts, the large-scale strike on a facility in the capital region destabilized the security agenda that the Russian side was presenting to international delegations at the forum. Putin completely ignored the attack on Moscow, his press Secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that the Russian dictator was not urgently notified about the night raid. The complete absence of any actions or statements from the country's leadership sparked a wave of outrage among Russian users.
It's come to the point where we can't find a shelter in the region in Moscow while the capital is already being pounded.
What's going on here? All of Moscow is on fire. Honestly, it really reminds me of... Tell me, uncle, was it for nothing that Moscow, scorched by fire, was surrendered to the French? Maybe we should finally solve this problem.
A large-scale drone attack has become a powerful psychological blow and demonstrated that the war has ceased to be an abstraction for Russians, finally undermining the image of the Kremlin's omnipotence.
What happened today in Moscow is the beginning of the end of Moscow's power over, more precisely, the Kremlin's power over Moscow and Russia, and even more precisely, Putin's power over Russia. This is what we are seeing right now, the beginning of the end of Putin's, the Kremlin's, and Moscow's power over the rest of Russia.
Russians must exert influence on Putin if they want to avoid further consequences of the ongoing hostilities. This was stated to journalists by the President of Ukraine. The head of state emphasized that the Ukrainian side will continue to respond harshly to Russian attacks and does not intend to tolerate strikes on its territory. According to Zelensky, despite the strengthening of the air defense system around Moscow, Ukraine has the capabilities for an effective response to the aggressor's actions.
We said we would get them. If Putin doesn't want to end this war but wants to continue it, we won't sit quietly. We will respond. But if Ukraine is going to burn, your Moscow will burn too. I believe we must increase the pressure. Of course, I mean pressure of various kinds. This is not just about long-range sanctions from Ukraine, but also sanctions from partners in energy, the shadow fleet, the oil and gas industry, the banking system, armaments, and the defense industry, in all possible areas, so that Russia understands there is no point in continuing the war. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Moscow.
Still refuses to negotiate an end to the war, despite the fact that Putin's rating is falling non-stop. In April 2026, the All-Russian Public Opinion Research Center recorded that the dictator's approval rating had been falling for several weeks in a row, reaching its lowest point since 2022. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry advised residents of the Russian capital to ask Putin exactly when he plans to end this war.
One of the most popular questions Muscovites are asking this morning is, what's happening? I can answer that. Your country unleashed an aggressive war against ours. For many years, it has been killing our people. Now that you know what's happening, ask Putin when he plans to put an end to this. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
On the sidelines of the G7 summit in France, US President Donald Trump stated that Putin is now in a significantly weaker position than before, and his room for maneuver is narrowing against the backdrop of military and economic costs. According to Putin's aide Ushakov, there have been no contacts between Russia and the US since the summit in France. The Kremlin is already panicking, claiming that Trump has been pumped full of harmful ideas. According to experts, Donald Trump's position indicates growing coordinated international pressure on the Kremlin. The White House is joining in. Victoria Chestukina for Freedom TV channel.
Meanwhile, a real budget catastrophe is spreading across Russia. Already 56 regions of the aggressor country have officially faced a severe deficit. 2/3 of Russian regions are left without money due to a sharp drop in oil and gas revenues. And this is a direct result of Ukraine's precision long-range strikes, which are systematically zeroing out the enemy's financial system. How exactly our defense forces are burning through Putin's military wallet, watch next.
Fuel problems over the past month have affected dozens of Russian regions. At the end of May, a gasoline crisis began in Russian-annexed Crimea. Later, problems on the peninsula worsened. Multi-hour queues appeared at gas stations, and gasoline began to be sold via QR codes.
My work involves a lot of traveling, so now I try to walk more. We're getting healthier. Well, how else? How to solve it? Only by ending the SMO. It won't be solved any other way, I'm afraid.
The fuel shortage in Crimea arose due to Defense Force attacks on Russian logistics. This is a new Ukrainian strike strategy. Long-range drones with elements of artificial intelligence play a key role in it. As a result, multi-kilometer traffic jams formed at gas stations. The fuel shortage also became noticeable in Russian-occupied Donetsk.
I stood here all day, from lunchtime until evening. Today I was luckier than yesterday. Today I'm lucky because there's gasoline. But yesterday I stood here and they never even delivered it.
Residents of the Oryol and Rostov regions began to complain about a similar situation. Later, St. Petersburg and Moscow joined them. The Ukrainian military says that while the Russian Federation tries to bypass international restrictions, Ukraine's defense forces continue to act. Long-range weapons are systematically destroying the fuel and energy complex and the military logistics of the enemy, which is called the main engine of Russian armed aggression.
As of June 2024, strikes at a distance of more than 1,500 kilometers on Russian territory are turning into a systemic financial, technological, and logistical paralysis of the Russian occupiers. More than 30% of capacity is gone. 16 large Russian refineries and terminals have already been hit. More than 40 technological units have been stopped. Due to the effects of international sanctions, the enemy cannot restore them. Import substitution is powerless here. From a report by the General Staff of the AFU on Telegram, June 16th.
The defense forces of Ukraine struck Moscow's largest oil refinery. This refinery processes about 11 million tons of oil per year. The enterprise provides a significant part of the Russian capital's fuel market, supplying key volumes of gasoline and more than 50% of diesel for the region, as well as fuel for Moscow's. Now this oil refinery has stopped.
What conclusion can be drawn from all this? First, the strikes by the defense forces on oil refineries, on LPDS, that is, pumping stations, on oil depots, are exceptionally effective. They provoke not only financial losses, since all this, everything destroyed, will need to be restored, and there are no funds, they are insufficient. But all this also provokes panic demand.
Energy intelligence analysts promised the Russian Federation the worst fuel crisis in the country's history. Almost a third of Russian refinery capacity, which is 2 billion, 14 million barrels per day, is not working. Already in early June, oil refining volumes in Russia fell below 4 million barrels per day, the lowest level in 21 years. Ukraine has also found a vulnerable spot in the Russian army, experts say, and it is increasingly hitting Russian logistics in the rear, trying to disrupt supplies to the Russian army and reduce its ability to attack. We are talking about strikes on roads and railways, warehouses, fuel infrastructure, and other facilities supplying Russian troops at the front. A new stage of the Ukrainian drone campaign could change the situation on the battlefield.
We continue to clearly demonstrate that Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities are absolutely crucial, both in striking all temporarily occupied territories and in delivering deep, effective strikes against Russian oil facilities and military-industrial enterprises. Since
May, Ukraine's defense forces have carried out about 200 strikes on roads leading to occupied Crimea. With the help of medium-range drones, the armed forces of Ukraine are cutting off supplies of weapons, fuel and equipment to frontline units. The power of the strikes is only growing. In the 4 weeks of May, about 125 trucks were hit on the highway. In June, one of the main targets was the final section of the land bridge to Crimea, the bridges between the Kherson region and the occupied peninsula. Natalia Gusak for the Freedom TV channel.
And while the aggressor's economy and air defense are bursting at the seams from drone strikes, Kyiv is ready to radically raise the stakes in this war. Ukraine is already actively working on creating its own ballistic missiles capable of reaching any target. At the same time, all of Europe is urgently strengthening its anti-missile defense, creating an iron shield against the Kremlin threat. About the powerful technological breakthrough of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex and new fundamental agreements between Kyiv and Western partners.
The production of interceptor missiles may begin in Ukraine. The leaders of the G7 countries expressed their readiness to consider the transfer of relevant licenses in a final statement following the summit in France. The document also speaks of unwavering support for Ukraine in defending its freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. In addition, the G7 countries agreed to increase supplies of air defense equipment, additional interceptor systems, all the details right now.
To support and accelerate this new momentum, we have agreed to increase the supply of air defense systems, additional systems and interceptors, as well as long-range capabilities. Furthermore, we are ready to consider granting Ukraine licenses that will allow for an increase in military production within the country, from the statement following the G7 summit in France. According to
the Financial Times, Ukraine is already testing its own missiles for air defense systems. They are expected to be cheaper than the American interceptors for the Patriot system. However, Kiev seeks to utilize every opportunity and is openly appealing to the US for licenses to produce their anti-ballistic missiles. On the sidelines of the G7 summit, President Volodymyr Zelensky discussed this topic with the head of the White House, Donald Trump.
I raised the issue of licenses and addressed it with President Trump. We need licenses for missile production. We have various capabilities. Producing the Patriot system and missiles is complex. Yes, I know, believe me. I have had many meetings and conversations with the manufacturing company, with the leadership, and other individuals. I am deeply involved in this topic, but in any case, we want to increase their production if they don't mind, if President Trump supports this idea. As of now, he is positively inclined.
The accelerated development of the Ukrainian defense industry is a response to Russian threats, but interceptor missiles alone won't win the war, which is why Kyiv, as President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, is also working on creating its own ballistic missiles. Strikes by the armed forces of Ukraine on Russian military targets prove that Ukraine will respond to aggression and grow stronger every day, the Ukrainian leader emphasized. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov added that there are no issues with funding the development of the
Ukrainian ballistic missile. It will change the course of this war. It will change Ukraine's status in the world as a whole. We have already changed it many times. This is a completely different level. That's why we must help. So, on one hand, I don't want to raise expectations too high, and on the other, I don't want to tip off our enemy. There are no financial problems with the development of Ukrainian ballistics.
Alongside the work on creating its own ballistics, Ukraine is expanding the geography of agreements for joint drone production. Canada is next. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that work is currently underway on a major UAV deal with Ottawa. This involves not just supplies, but also scaling up Ukrainian developments together with partners.
Soon, the delivery of another batch of air defense kits from Pearl will take place. We are collaborating more closely on the joint production of drones and will discuss the next stage of this work.
I agree that we have not only developed good personal relations, but also have an excellent opportunity to establish joint production with Canada of combat drones and other equipment.
The most important condition for the development of the Ukrainian defense industry is confidence in the support of Western partners. If the Russian war against Ukraine continues, the G7 countries will help get through the winter, the Ukrainian head of state assured. During the summit, Kyiv's partners agreed on an energy package for the winter period. Additional funds are expected for the protection of critical facilities, strengthening air defense, and for the purchase of diesel, gas, and gasoline. Mikita Skoblikov for the Freedom TV channel.
What do you think about these events? Write to me in the comments, leave a like, and stay in the loop. More to come.